And 2 weeks ago, the attention of the entire world was focused on the image of a young girl sitting beside the rubble in Surfside, Florida. The mayor of Surfside had noticed as she sat there and didn't know what she was doing. She was looking into her phone. And then, as you all know, he later realized that she was reciting a Jewish prayer, Psalms, Tehillim. And when he spoke with her, he asked what she was doing there. And as you all know, she said that her father was in the building. And the father had gone missing. And she was praying that he be found and that they would be reunited. That image, because the mayor of Surfside happened to see the young girl and was so visibly moved, it made the whole tragedy so personal to him, as he said at that news conference. That image was telegraphed to the entire world. In Europe, everyone saw that image. In the Far East, people were aware of it. So much so that when President Biden went down to Surfside, he met with that young girl. And I think everyone felt throughout the world how sad that was. How poignant that was. What a tragedy. But was it really a tragedy, that image? As long as that young girl sat by the rubble, praying for her father to return, then that was not a tragedy. That meant that there was hope. There was hope that he would be found, that he would return, they would be reunited. That 12-year-old girl, Elisheva Cohen, that Bas Yisrael, is Klal Yisrael. For thousands of years, we have been praying, young and old, sitting on the floor beside the rubble, praying that our own father, Avinu Avarachman, that he returned to us. Because for years we were together with our father in that home, where the Shekhinah resided, and we would visit with him, and we would be together. But one day that building collapsed and the walls came tumbling down, and all that was left of that building where our father, the Shekhinah, resided, all that was left was rubble, and our father disappeared. He was no longer with us. And for 2,000 years we have been sitting on the floor at the side of the rubble, begging, pleading, praying that our father return, so that once again we would be together in yet another house. And we plead, Hashivenu Hashem Eilecha v'nashuva. Please, let us return. Come back to us and we will come back to you and we will be together. All that we want is all that little girl wanted. What did she want? She wanted just one thing. Just one thing. Chadesh Yomeinu Kikedem. She couldn't believe what happened. All of a sudden, at the blink of an eye, everything was destroyed. Chadesh Yomeinu Kikedem. Let's just roll the tape back. Let's make it the way it was. Let me open my eyes and find out that that was all a bad dream and it never happened. I'm sure that was running through her head. But how is it that for 2,000 years we are still sitting in the floor beside the rubble and mourning for the Churban? How is it? You know, other civilizations have had grand temples, lahavdil, ancient civilizations that are no more. We don't find that their descendants are praying and pleading for things to be rebuilt. They moved on. It's over. Maybe it's time for us to move on as well. Maybe it's just time to move on. In fact, when a person in life experiences a terrible loss, a loss of a family member, so we have a protocol, we have a program. First a person sits Shiva, and then there's the 30 days of the Shloshim period, and there's a whole year of Avelis. And after a year, we get up. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu creates in the Bria something called Shikha, where we begin to forget. And that's normal, and that's natural, and that's the way life is supposed to be. And after a while, after a number of years, as time passes, people no longer remember that much. Yeah, of course, we had a loved one, a father, a mother, sister, brother, whatever it was. But how is it we can't forget? How is it we can't move on? Come on, let's move on already. 2,000 years. This is not my kasha. This kasha was asked by the Chassam Sofer. And the Chassam Sofer said the following. We have a chazal. Ein mekablin tchumen al hachai. We don't accept consolation when someone is still alive. Yaakov Avinu, for 22 years, Yaakov Avinu thought that his son, was told that his son Yosef is no longer alive. He was dead. Torah Yosef. Yet for 22 years, Yaakov Avinu couldn't get over it. He was always thinking about Yosef. Now, how was that? And the teretz is, as Chazal explained, he couldn't get over it because Yosef was really alive. And as long as a person is really alive, you can't forget about it. You can't be comforted. You can't forget. Even if you don't know where they are. You can't stop crying. You can't stop feeling the pain. You're hoping and waiting and yearning for them to come back and to return. And the fact is that it's 2,000 years later and we're still mourning. We can't forget. The fact that after 2,000 years we can't move on and we can't forget means that we still have some relationship under that rubble. It's not dead, because if it was dead, there would be shikha. We would move on. Everyone else did. It shows that the relationship to the Shekhinah is very much still alive. Says the Chassam Sofer, that's what he explains. It says, "Kalamis Aval al Yerushalayim Zoiche v'Roya es Nachumta." That if you mourn over Jerusalem, you are Zoiche, you merit and see on its consolation, on its redemption. Chassam Sofer is bothered. Zoiche v'Roya. What do you mean Zoiche v'Roya? If you mourn today, Yiske v'Yireh, you will merit in the future. You will see in the future. Says the Chassam Sofer, no. The fact that we're still mourning, the fact that we can't forget, The fact that we're still in pain and we're still praying, that means there's no shikha. Because there's still hope that our Father, who is missing for so long, is still under that rubble, kavayachal, and that He will return. The fact that we're sitting on the floor today in 2021 means now, there's the Chama now. You realize it? Everyone else forgot, and we can't forget. That's on the Chama that we haven't been able to forget. You know, Napoleon understood that. Napoleon, it's famously said, was walking in the outskirts of Paris, and he noticed in the summertime that there were Jews, well, he didn't know they were Jews, people that were sitting in a temple of some sort, and people were still coming, and it was very late at night. And he asked his aide, what is that? And the aide reported that these were Jews who were mourning, and they are praying in their synagogue. And he said, what are they mourning over? And he said, well, their temple was destroyed. And he said, well, when did that happen? And at that time, it was 1,800 years ago. And Napoleon couldn't get over it. 1,800 years? And they are still mourning over a destroyed temple? And Napoleon famously said that a nation that cries for 1,800 years for their temple will surely merit to see it rebuilt. On Tisha B'Av, each one of us is that little girl sitting beside the rubble with pain and totally lost. And as long as we're praying, there's hope that we will be reunited. And we say, Hashivenu Hashem Elecha v'nashuva chadei shemeinu kekedem. We sit by the rubble and we pray that we be returned to our Father, and our Father somehow be found. The Kinnah we're about now to recite is one of the highlights of the Yom Kippur, of the Tisha B'Av, and in fact it's mentioned in Yom Kippur as well, but on Tisha B'Av, this Kinnah of Arzei Halvonon recounts in a very moving fashion the tragedy of the Asara Harugei Malchus. It describes in graphic, unusually graphic detail, the slaughter of the greatest of our people we're familiar with if you learn Shas. These were the giants of their day. They weren't all contemporaries. In fact, although from the Asarei Harugei Malchus, most of them were slaughtered during the time after the Churban, during the time of the Bar Kokhba rebellion, but two, which we'll go to in a second, were slaughtered at the time of the Churban. Now, who were they? We have to mention their names. Rachanina ben Tradin, you know, was famously wrapped in a Sefer Torah before it was set on fire. Rebbe Kiva, the great Rebbe Kiva, whose flesh was flayed with iron combs. Rabbi Yehuda ben Bava, who was riddled with 300 spears. Rav Chutzpah Turgaman, which we know, his body was dismembered so much so that Acha, Elisha ben Avuya, went off the derech because he saw the tongue of Rav Chutzpah Turgaman, the tongue that never said anything other than the Dvar Shebekadusha in its entire life. It was one day before his 130th birthday when the Romans got to him. He begged that they should give him one more day to be able to recite Kriya Shema that day. They ripped out his tongue and they put it in the garbage heap. Rabbi Yeshovev HaSofer was tortured, and then to add insult to injury, they didn't permit his body to be buried, but they took him and they sent his body to wild dogs, and the wild dogs just took the body and fled it with it all over the streets where they dragged it. It was such a bizoyan. It was so painful. These were the greatest of our people. Rabbi Elazar ben Shemoy, Rabbi Chanoi ben Chechanoi, Rabbi Yehuda ben Dama, all of them were mercilessly tortured in graphic detail. It's unusual for us to find that our masters would write in such graphic detail. I mean, just tell us what happened, we don't spare the details. And the two that I didn't mention were actually the first two that were killed. Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel Anossi and Rabbi Shmuel HaKohen Gadol. This Rabbi Shmuel is Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, who was in the Kodesh Kodshim, the holiest place in the world, at the holiest time, on Yom Kippur, one with the Rabbeinu Shalom. When the Romans took them, each one begged the Romans that they be killed first because they did not want to witness the death of the other and then also to be killed. So they drew lots, and the lot fell on Rabbi Shimon ben Gamliel, who was murdered first. When they brought Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, the Kohen Gadol, when they brought him to be executed, the executioner's daughter admired his face. He had physical beauty apparently. And she pleaded with her father and with the powers that be that they spare his life. But they refused. But instead, to placate that young daughter, they decided that they would flay the facial skin, to remove the face of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha while he was still alive, so that the daughter could gaze at his beauty. Unspeakable barbarism. In fact, to add insult to injury, the Roman legion would keep that face and take it with them in battle as a good luck charm. And once every 70 years during the period of the Roman Empire, they would take the facial skin of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, and that they would display it in a ceremony which showed how Esav prevailed over Yaakov. At the time of the killing of Rabbi Shmuel ben Elisha, the Malachim, the angels in heaven, even they couldn't fathom how this was possible. And in the capital, in the piyut of Eile Eskero, which is the companion piece that we say on Yom Kippur, we read as follows: Sarfei Ma'ala, Tza'aki b'ma'ala. The angels of heaven screamed with such deep bitterness, and they said famously to the Rabbeinu Shalom, Zu Torah v'zu schara? How could this be? Zu Torah v'zu schara? So we say in the piyut, listen to this carefully, to me this just resounded. Onsa baskol mishamayim. Now this is God talking. Onsa baskol mishamayim. And he said the following: Im eshmet koil acha. If I hear one more sound from you, epiches ha'olam l'mayim, I'm going to turn the whole world over into water, the soyoboyu into nothings, osis hadoimim. I will change the earth into astonishing emptiness. What kind of response is that? They asked a legitimate question. It was a legitimate question. It was a legitimate question. It shouldn't have been responded to by, just get away. If not, I'll destroy everything. Is that what it really meant? Say Chazal. An amazing insight in what the Rabbeinu Shalom was saying. And Chazal say, there was one other time in all of Tanakh where we find the Rabbeinu Shalom spoke to this issue. And there the Rabbeinu Shalom said it somewhat clear, but it's the same message. In the story of Eve, you know, was a man who was plagued with the biggest challenges and tragedies in life. He lost everything he owned. He lost his house. He lost his wife. He lost his children. And Eve couldn't understand what was going on. So Eve's friends came. And if you learn Sefer Eve, much of the Sefer is his friends telling him, you must have done something terribly wrong. You must have done something terribly wrong. I mean, why else did the Rabbeinu Shalom do such a thing? And Eve looked at them and he rejected all of their accusation. He said, I didn't do anything wrong. Nothing. And they said, you don't know what you're talking about. Of course you did something wrong. And Eve was adamant, I didn't do nothing. I didn't do anything wrong. Why did the Rabbeinu Shalom have this happen to me? You have to read all of Sefer Eve. You have to get to Kapitel Lamed Ches. You have to read 38 chapters, almost towards the end of Sefer Eve, where the Rabbeinu Shalom appears. After here's the whole Shak B'tai with the friends and Eve and back and forth. And you get to this pasuk. HaKadosh Baruch Hu appears. And as he starts to tell Eve, he begins by saying the following pasuk. Eifa hayisa b'yasti oretz. Where were you when I founded the earth? Haged im yodata bina. Tell me if you know the deep understanding. The Rebbeinu Shalom was saying, were you there in the beginning? Do you have any idea what's happening in this play? You show up in the middle of the third act. You come into the theater in the middle of the third act, in the second scene of the third act, and you sit in your cushioned seat, and you're trying to understand the play, and as the play unfolds, you're saying, hey, that's not right. That's not fair. Makes no sense. Why is this happening to that guy? He didn't do anything wrong. And Rebbeinu Shalom is saying, were you there in the beginning of the play? Do you have an idea what the storyline is about? And the Chofetz Chaim says, you know, there's a story of a fellow who comes to shul, and he comes to shul, he comes late. He's davening mincha. So usually he comes in, and all he comes in as he's coming in late, when they're saying Ashrei, he said, here's the following, Es kolei havav ves kolei shuam yashmid. Now, the pasuk really begins, Shomer Hashem es kolei havav ves kolei shuam yashmid. That's not what he hears. He walks into shul, he hears, Es kolei havav ves kolei shuam yashmid. And he goes, hey, what's going on here? Es kolei havav ves kolei shuam yashmid? God's going to obliterate his beloved ones and the ones that are evil at the same time? It's not right. It's not fair. Makes no sense. Of a kert, someone is there on time, but he leaves during Ashrei, and all he hears the Baltila say, Shomer Hashem es kolei havav ves kolei shuam. Shomer Hashem es kolei havav, and he walks out, and he's on his way back home. He says, Shomer Hashem es kolei havav ves kolei shuam. Shomer Hashem es kolei havav ves kolei shuam makes no sense. That's as the Chofetz Chaim is the story of life. We're there in the third act. You come late, and you don't know what's going on. It's not fair or verkehrt. You were there from the beginning. You were there when the lights went out and the curtains opened from the very beginning. But you leave the play early before it's over. So you're leaving the theater and you're walking out and you say, you know what? The whole thing don't make sense. It don't make sense. Of course it doesn't make sense. You left in the middle of the play. We don't know why people suffer. We don't know why people suffer. We don't know why the worst things happen to the best people. But this kinna gives you an insight of why we don't understand. People have kashas. People in the Holocaust had kashas. Don't think they didn't. If you read books that say that everyone had such unbridled emunah and they walked in and getanzt im Gestoyre in the middle of Auschwitz, people had kashas. That's the truth. They had many kashas. Grace and Rebbes had kashas. People have kashas on their own. People have kashas about Surfside. And it's not only when a building collapses that people have kashas. People have kashas when their whole life collapses in front of them. They have a personal loss, a tragedy, a trauma. They have great kashas. This kinna we're about to say, although it doesn't answer the kasha, it explains to you and gives you an insight as why you have a kasha. And why you can't understand the teretz. You know, when you learn Gemara, if you ever learn Gemara, right? You learn Shas, you do the Afyoim and everything. Sometimes the Gemara will say, it'll ask somebody who asks a question, that's the question. The Gemara had to answer the Torah, and then the Gemara says, kasha, 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 kasha. Sometimes the Gemara says, the Gemara brings the kasha. What does the Gemara say? Not kasha. The Gemara says, tiyufta. What's the difference between a kasha and a tiyufta? A kasha, and many times you look in the back will say, kasha. So the Gemara says, yeah, there is a teretz, but the Gemara didn't want to get into the teretz. Kasha, it's a kasha. And for the kasha, because there is a teretz. If you learn Gemara, kasha means there is a teretz, so the Gemara doesn't want to tell you what the teretz is. It wants to move on. Tiyufta, what's tiyufta? When I was young in the Chassidishim, tiyufta, upgefragt. That's it. Upgeschlagen. This completely refuted. There's a big difference between a kasha and a tiyufta. We have kashas, which means there's a teretz. And sometimes the Gemara uses the following lashon. Goes through, asks a question, then doesn't want to say kasha. The Gemara doesn't say tiyufta. The Gemara says teku. Teku, we all know what's teku. It's an acronym, Rosh Hashanah, Tishpu Yitaritz, Kushis Vaboyas. Eliyahu Hanavi will come, and you have this kasha there. At that time, you'll understand. This teku, at the time of Eliyahu Hanavi will come with Yemoshe Mashiach. He's not only going to answer the kashas on the Gemara. Eliyahu Hanavi is going to answer the kashas that you had about life. And then you will understand the whole narrative. This kinna is an answer to life's biggest questions. This kinna is not only an answer to the secret of Jewish survival, it's an answer to the secret of human survival. About how it is possible that the worst things can happen to the best people. You say the kinna.